Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Victoria Hill, the Public Information Officer for the City of Billings. And if you've been watching, you know that we're focusing on public safety updates and giving updates from departments that received public safety mill levy funding from the 2021 vote that our voters made. Thank you so much for supporting the cause. So we've talked to code enforcement, the fire department, and today we're focusing on the police department. So we invited Police Chief Rich St. John to talk about some of the updates that you're seeing within your department. Like I said, the vote happened in 2021. Property taxes kicked in November 2022 to collect on those funds. So what kind of growth has the department absorbed over the past year?
Well, first, thanks, Victoria, for having me. A great opportunity to, to really highlight what the police department has been doing over the last couple of years. The 2021 vote was just one of two. So the citizens did pass two safety levy votes, and I too thank the public for that, for the support. But I also think that they recognize the daunting situation of a growing city and some of the problem areas that we're dealing with. Essentially, the vote came on the heels of a third-party assessment, which really looked at our entire operation from top to bottom and made recommendations looking solely at efficiency and effectiveness. And the city council was very adamant that they wanted to make sure we were operating as efficiently and effectively as possible before we went out to the voters. That message was relayed that we were. Recommendations were made. The great majority of them cost nothing. They were just internal adjustments. But the ones that did cost money were essentially adding personnel and the logistical support to go along with that. The safety levy itself involved 4 specific departments. It's very easy to paint everything public safety with the police department, and we see that an awful lot when you start talking about the levy in its total. But of the 4 departments, we received about $2.5 million. And with that $2.5 million, we essentially added 24 additional FTEs or full-time positions, half of those being civilian. That was a very unique approach to it. And what we have done since the inception of that, and even before, we were spending money before it was assessed, is that we realigned our organization to be more efficient, and then we made some tweaks internally, and then we applied the additional resources. So we have added approximately 12 sworn officers, some sergeants, and then some civilian positions to help support what we have going on day to day.
And going beyond that, one of the additions, community service officers, how many of them are you getting on board and what are they doing?
Well, this is an interesting solution. Again, the recommendation didn't require all 24 FTEs to be sworn police officers, half of them again being civilians. The community service officer is not a new approach. In fact, we had them when I started many years ago, and it's very common throughout the country. But what it is, it's essentially a civilian position. They are not sworn officers, and they go and take calls and handle tasks that up until this point we've had sworn officers doing, just because that's all we had. And so what the thinking is that we're going to free up the officers for more critical and emergent situations, while some of the lesser calls will be handled by the CSOs. The recommendation was a total of 7 of those. We have hired 4 of the 7. They have been on the street for about 2 or 3 months and have made a magnificent and significant impact in what we're seeing. Early numbers, they've handled about 100 calls that we would normally have to send an officer to or send them to the Crime Prevention Center. And they cleaned up about 500 calls that were waiting for some sort of police department response out of the Crime Prevention Center. So in the short time, at 50% of what we're supposed to have, they made a remarkable impact. It's hard to impress police officers, but they've already said we really appreciate what they're
Great.
doing, and appreciate the help. So very, very happy that that has come to fruition and has been successful so far.
And to give the folks watching at home an idea, what kind of calls do the CSOs go out on?
Yeah, essentially we're talking about calls where there are no suspects, no witnesses, no evidence. So cold calls, thefts, vandalisms. They help with traffic accidents. They help direct traffic. They do some follow-up if, for example, kind of the sign of the times is surveillance video. And it takes a little while for residences or businesses to make copies or get it to us. And so up until this point, an officer would get called back to do that. Well, they can pick up evidence, things of that sort for us. So at the end of the day, what it has really done, it has freed up the sworn officer's time to be more responsive and more proactive on the things that are really problematic in the community.
And just to be clear, these CSOs, they won't be sent out to a situation where maybe there's a gun involved or weapons of any sort.
No, they are not armed. Their vehicle is drastically different. Their uniform is different. They will not in any way, shape, or form be confused as a sworn police officer, nor will we send them to in-progress calls, crimes against people, assaults, things of that sort. So it's a really kind of an in-between of our crime prevention center, which is staffed with volunteers and the sworn officers. So it's kind of a stopgap in between there. And again, it's a new program for us. So finding our way, where can they be best used? What's the most efficient use of this? And then of course we're only at 50%. So I really look forward to getting the other half on board.
Yeah, and he's saying when the other half might happen, or are you waiting to see how things go?
Well,
with
a
these first
couple
four?
things, budgetary issues. I mean, obviously, the city council was looking at a wide variety of solutions for the Stillwater building and the deficiency there. The police department is probably, the prime, resident that's going to go over there, taking an entire floor.
Right.
And so we're looking for some additional help there. So the balance of our CSO program, which would be 3 of 7, essentially is deferred temporarily until we can, see what it is that we need at the Stillwater building to help offset that cost. But I can tell you that the administrator has made it very clear that anything we do over there will not affect staffing. No layoffs, no cuts, no deferrals or waiting to hire staff. So we're full go there once we get the okay to move forward.
And something else that might relieve, or in my mind definitely help relieve some of the sworn officers once this comes into play, the CRU or Crisis Response Unit. I was able to have Chief Valdez on one of these segments, and he said, it'll be staffed maybe with one of his EMTs, firefighters, but how will it impact the police department?
That will be a significant impact for us. Currently, what we're talking about is going on calls where we're dealing with people that might be homeless, have co-occurring addiction, mental illness issues. It's quality of life for the community. These are the transient type people that are out among the community, and we get called on them frequently. And right now, the only response that we have on somebody that might be having some sort of medical issue is you're going to get a fire truck, 2 policemen, and an ambulance. That's what we have available. And obviously that's not efficient. And so the third party recognized that and made recommendation. It landed with the fire department, the crisis response unit. But the ultimate goal for the police department is that we cannot abdicate our responsibility to make sure everybody's safe. So initially when this gets up and running, we will go. Once it's secure and they're safe, then we're going to leave the scene. So what's going to happen is now we might spend tops 15 minutes on one of these calls, where before we were having to see it to conclusion, which might take 2 officers upwards to an hour. Hopefully, as this thing gets rolling and the crew staff gets to know the clients and the people that they're dealing with, they can even say that we're going to be okay, and you don't even have a police response at all.
Okay.
We spent millions and millions of dollars on 90 frequent flyers, if you will, who use services. A study done probably 3 or 4 years ago, and that's just for just the reason that, you know, police, fire, and ambulance are showing up, and it's non-recoverable costs. That's taxpayer dollars. So how can we mitigate that? And the recommendation was creating this crew unit based out of the fire department because they provide the medical support.
And that crew will be staffed with experts who are able to provide the right type of care. And not to discredit officers, but I mean, you guys are also have some knowledge and background with some crisis response, and that knowledge handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Our officers are trained in what we call crisis intervention. It's a tool in their toolbox to try to identify what issues somebody may be experiencing at that time. We fully realize that the jail's not the right spot for some of these people, and the ER is not the right spot. But right now, that's really the only alternatives we have. And so crew staff, as well as people that we have working, you know, some mental health people working with our downtown officers, what we're asking them to do, and it's been pretty effective, is to divert those individuals out of the justice system specifically, secondarily out of the medical system, into an area where they can be stabilized, get some care, get some counseling, get what they need, and alleviate the pressure on the justice system specifically.
And another area that the police department focuses on violent crime reduction. It's part of the department's strategic objectives. So what programs do you have in place to answer to that?
Yeah, that has always been a top priority. Of late, you know, going back to 2020, 2019, violent crime, and specifically homicide, just exploded here, and there's a myriad of reasons for that. COVID wasn't helpful, and we're certainly seeing issues with methamphetamine and now fentanyl coming on board. But some of the strategies that we have really, you know, they're nothing that's overly scientific, because what we're doing is applying the resources that we have. We're using crime analysis and mapping to identify what we call hot spots. We're also targeting problematic individuals, and that's what we're going after to try to drive those areas down. You spoke to Tina Hoger at Code Enforcement. We know that a lot of our problematic areas are in parts of town or residences or areas that are run down. And so working with Code specifically to really expedite getting properties cleaned up, getting people out of there, to try to make it unfavorable for a bad element to operate. So really what we call it hotspot policing. You know, we get after the people that are causing us problems. We have specialized units that do that, and the only reason we're able to be so successful is because we are properly staffed. The biggest thing that we were having trouble with is that, you know, at about 95,000 calls for service a year, and that's probably where we're going to finish 2022. Is that our officers run from call to call, and they don't have any time to be proactive. All of the strategies that we have implemented, supported by the third-party evaluator, positions us to be able to handle the calls for service as efficiently as possible, offload some of the more or the less priority cases to civilians, and be able to staff our proactive branch and arm. And that's where we really make a difference, is being able to be proactive. And we're set up very nicely for that right now, thanks to the assessment, and of course for the voters for giving us the extra resources.
And talk about some of the challenges that the department faces in violent crime. I mean, you have the criminals out on the street, obviously, but what is it like being in your shoes and shoes of those officers?
Well, it's very frustrating knowing that our number one priority is to get a handle on violent crime. And in one sense, we haven't been able to intervene on the front end of things. However, on the backside, all of the homicides that we have, all the violent crime for the most part, we have solved. And we've been able to provide resolution and closure to the families. And so in that respect, our officers and detectives are doing a magnificent job on some very, very difficult cases. On the front end, though, that's very, very frustrating for me because we're dealing with, addiction issues. We know methamphetamine is part of it. We're dealing with broken families. We're dealing with a very, very violent group of juveniles, with no authority figures at home, running wild, and they're very problematic. They're problematic in the justice system itself, and they're problematic to deal with because of their attitude. And so those are things that, again, they're asking the police department, what are you going to do about that? Well, a lot of those things are social issues, which we need to lean really heavily on our partners, which is part of the coalition that we have going to try to educate, intervene, prevent. And then we have, on the back end, we have enforcement. And on the drug side of things, the interdiction part of stuff. And there's, arresting people, investigating stuff's never been a problem. We do a fair share of that, but how can we prevent it in the first place? That's what the challenge is, we have, weapons are everywhere lately. We have a lot of stolen guns. We have some that, people just gave people, and we have some that don't even show up on the radar. They're nowhere in the system. And we're seeing, especially the youth that have been in these violent confrontations are very quick to go to weapons. They settle disputes, they settle arguments with a firearm. Many, many years ago, that wasn't the case. It might be a, fist fight in the alley. We're not seeing that anymore. And so that's very, very difficult and very troubling to get a handle on it. On the backside, however, as I indicated, cases are solved, and I'm very, very, pleased and proud of the effort that everybody's doing there.
Yeah, it is a different time in Billings. I've been here for 10 years. I know you much longer than that. You have the growth, and then you have that change in youth understanding the gravity of using a weapon to settle a dispute. But what can the people of Billings do, if anything, at this point to help our overall environment and atmosphere here in Billings?
Yeah, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
That we could talk about there. I think that just from a parent standpoint, and I think that you just need to be involved and engaged with your kids. You need to pay attention to what they're doing. To have teenage kids, high school, middle school, that are out, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning with handguns, shooting up, a apartment complex or whatnot. Where are the parents in here? Again, that's a social issue. It's nothing the police department's charged with, but we get asked that all the time. So again, the fractured family dynamic, really, if we can do anything to help bring that back in. Obviously methamphetamine is still a significant threat in the community. It drives almost all of our violent crime. The officer-involved shootings that we've had, methamphetamine's been the common denominator in those. It drives a lot of the property crime. And of late, we just had somebody that was arraigned in court, that shot somebody or pointed a gun at somebody that said, I need money for methamphetamine. So it's a threat. Fentanyl is a close second, if not overtaking, but what we see with that, it's just killing people. And so the police department, ourselves, in 1 week had 3 or 4 Narcan saves, which is just unheard of, and that's not counting the medical when they get there and do their thing. So we're seeing those influences that are really catastrophic on a small group. Actually, it's a small population that are, we see the perpetrator-victim cycle in a lot of our violent crime. You know, and then the stories are wide and as varied as you would like as to how fentanyl got into somebody's life, people you would never expect. You know, people that are very successful and people that are not.
Yeah.
So those are the things on the front end, and we can get a handle on those, and I'll
Right.
take any suggestions that, you know, that you like. You know, that's going to be most helpful on the back end.
Yeah, and talk about our ability as, you know, property owners, homeowners, vehicle owners, what we can do ourselves to make sure we are, I guess, lessen the chances of falling victim to maybe someone breaking in.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are probably 112,000 in the city limits proper. We definitely swell as our, you know, friends from the county come into town. But you know, the police department's 167 top to bottom. So we can't be everywhere all the time. But what we really want people to do is to look out for each other. Neighborhood watches are great, but the you know, the Homeland Security hashtag of see something, say something is so fitting. The number one call that we have year in and year out is what we call suspicious when you look at our numbers. And it's increased over the years, and that is good. And what that means to me is that the citizens of Billings are seeing something that's out of place, out of the ordinary, and they're calling the police department. Now, not always does that turn into criminal activity, but what it shows me is that people are paying attention, they're looking out for their neighbors, and do not feel bad about calling. That's what we're here for. Sometimes we interrupt stuff. Some of the biggest cases that we've ended up, you know, being able to stop came from somebody calling in something that didn't look right. So that's a big thing. The other thing, again, is don't do anything to make yourself a victim. Lock your car doors. Take your purses and your stuff out of it. Lock your doors. You know, we have a program called Crime Prevention through Environmental Design. It's, the acronym is CPTED. It's offered not only to businesses but also to residences free of charge. We have a group of trained people that'll come out and look at your property and make recommendations. You're not obligated to do anything about fixing a light bulb, trimming a bush, basically making, hardening up your property, whether it's a business or your residence, hardening it up against criminal activity. Can't stop everything. If somebody is really determined to, you know, to get into your house, for example, they will. But you don't need to make it easy for them. So those are the things that, you know, that we really want to encourage our citizens to do.
And I have to point out, those are everything you mentioned. That's daily life for people in some of the bigger cities, and we're certainly seeing Billings grow. And so, with that shift, we also have to shift our mindset, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we go on a lot of you know, things where we're talking personal safety. You know, we had an unfortunate carjacking at the clinic and ended up catching that person. You know, so things that, you know, I've said it before, we're not Mayberry any longer, and you need to pay attention and take care of things. The biggest thing for personal safety is just pay attention and be aware of your surroundings. I can't tell you how many times somebody said they just came out of nowhere. Well, no, they didn't. You didn't see them. You weren't paying attention because you had your head in your phone or you were distracted.
Yeah.
But you know, we are happy to give tips on, you know, safe places to park, what to avoid. You know, when you're walking here, you know, carry yourself with confidence and don't look like a victim. All of those things that everybody has learned from mom and dad over the years is still applicable.
In Chicago, where I grew up, we call that street smarts. You have to have your be street smart in addition to book smart. And you were mentioning the suspicious calls factor. Example, just recently saw a truck in the middle of our street at night, headlights on, just sitting in the middle of the street. I called it into dispatch. I think it's a situation people need to know. They might feel like, oh, well, why bother calling that in? But it is important that they pick up that phone and at least report what's going on.
Absolutely, and I hear that a lot, is I don't want to bother you. You guys are too busy already. Well, yeah, we're busy, but if you don't tell us what's going on in your neighborhood, we probably don't know. Because again, at 95 plus thousand calls for service, and we're running maybe 10 to 12 officers a shift, they're busy. And so I encourage people to call. Don't feel bad about it. That's what we're there for. And I commend you for making that phone call. I mean, I don't know what came of it, but if you didn't call, highly likely an officer's not going to come by and see a guy parked in the middle of the street.
Right, yeah, and you just never know what was
Right.
going on. And
Exactly.
it was a situation where I was like, I should call this in. I'm going to call it in. I've been working with the city now. I know better, but and I know that things like this are very important. So, Chief, I thank you so much for spending time with us today. We have 3 minutes left. Anything else that you want to chat about before we wrap up?
I really want to emphasize to your viewers what a great community Billings is. And it's truly, truly a safe community and a place where you can raise a family, raise your kids. I would do it all over again. Understand that what we're talking about here is a very, very narrowly focused area. I mean, again, it makes the headlines because there's a lot of splash to it, but it's a narrow scope on what we're dealing with. A small group of criminals for the most part that are causing the majority of the issues. But by and large, great community, well policed. The staff that I've been blessed with, very talented, exceptional group of individuals that are very, very passionate about what they do. And the support I have from administration and council allows me to hire A+ personnel. And what you see happening is because of that ability. So just a big thanks across the board to everybody. But I want people to know Billings is great.
Yeah.
Billings is great, despite a few bad people doing some bad things. But we'll keep working at it.
Yeah, there's always the bad eggs that'll be part of every community, and every interaction I hear about with a Billings police officer has been a positive one. Maybe somebody had a bad situation, but hey, the officer that came out was great and very helpful. And so I think that speaks volumes to what you have going on in your department.
Very blessed.
Yes, all right. Well, Chief, thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody watching at home as well and online for joining us in this series. We have the police department, code enforcement, fire department, and we're also going to catch up with our city attorney and city administrator. Again, thank you very much for your support and have a great rest of your day.